Hello and welcome to PFF Wire. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Hopefully this intro goes a little bit smoother than last time. Brad, can you hear me this time?
I can hear you. I'm glad only one person made fun of us in the comments. I think they said we were cringe. Sorry, our technology isn't perfect, but we're back. We're much better.
We did it. We're on for today's show. All right, let's kick things off right off the bat with Fresh Off the Wire, our first segment of the show. I think that the biggest thing that we haven't touched on that happened since Wednesday's show was certainly the Kadarius Toney trade from the New York Giants to the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City Chiefs gave up a third-round compensatory pick and a sixth-round pick, sent that to the New York Giants for wide receiver Kadarius Toney. And there's a lot of different elements to this trade, but I think my biggest takeaway is that I personally view this as a win-win for both teams. The Giants get basically a free third-round pick, or at least this new regime gets essentially a free third-round pick for a player that they weren't using, who has played, I think, like one or two games all season, who clearly might not have been happy within the organization. So they get something for him, even though this was a Dave Gettleman pick. And the Kansas City Chiefs get a player who's got a ton of upside, who at least I talked to one NFC pro scout who thinks that he could somewhat replace Tyreek Hill in the aggregate. I don't think that we're expecting Kadarius Toney to be Tyreek Hill, but he's a player who can line up in the slot, make things happen with the ball in his hands, who's got really good speed. He's not a 4-2 guy, but he's a 4-3 guy. So I don't know. This is one of those rare, to me at least, win-win trades for both sides.
I see it the same way as you. The Chiefs have kind of done this forever now, trading late-round picks. Obviously, this one a compensatory third for former first-round picks or highly drafted players. Mike Hughes a couple of years ago. Like, we can go down the list. There's a bunch of examples, and they, the talent is not in question. When Kadarius Toney did play last year against Dallas, he had 9 or 10 catches. Against the Bucs, he had 7 catches. He does bring the speed element, but I think he's probably, in my eyes, a Juju Smith-Schuster long-term replacement where he's on a one-year deal. You bring in Kadarius Toney for 2.5 years and about $5.2 million, all of that fully guaranteed. So New York gets out of that obligation. And yeah, like you said, obviously they were not going to use him. They've had all the wide receiver injuries this year and still have kept him on the shelf. I think that tells you a lot.
Yeah, and he immediately said on Twitter after the trade that he's healthy and ready to go. Clearly, the Chiefs, I would say, view it that way as well. At least heard that he was healthy. Otherwise, they would not have pulled off this trade. But, I mean, Kadarius Toney last season had 12 forced missed tackles on something like 39, 38 catches, something like that. So he had one of the highest forced missed tackle rates in the NFL at wide receiver last year. I think he was third in that forced missed tackle rate. And this season alone, I think he only has like 3 touches or something, but he had a 28-yard run where he had 3 forced missed tackles on that run alone. So this is a very explosive playmaker. You can make a case for whether or not he was worth a first-round pick or not. Clearly for the Giants, he was not. But for the Chiefs, they're still getting that first-round talent. And I know that you've kind of heard some things, or everyone's kind of heard some things about him off the field, if that's going to be any sort of a issue or anything like that. But I was reaching out to a source about that. Not someone who would know Kadarius Toney particularly well, but someone who's certainly in the league who did some research on Kadarius Toney before last year's draft. And he basically said, I don't think it's anything malicious. I think it's more like immaturity and life skills. And those are things that can obviously improve for Kadarius Toney. I think that you probably could have guessed that even from just the way that he was with the Giants at times.
Yeah, I saw a joke tweet. He has more rap tracks out right now than receptions. So I think young Joka is a little bit focused on his career off the field. But yeah, that doesn't mean he's a bad person, or it just means maybe he needs to focus a little bit more. It sounds like the team thought some of his hamstring issues were because maybe he wasn't training outside of the facility and stuff like that. But yeah, again, that doesn't mean anything really beyond if you can turn that around and get him to really buy in and lock in. And I imagine the prospect aspect of playing with Patrick Mahomes can heal a hamstring as fast as anything in the world, then the upside is obviously through the roof, because I think he could absolutely eat in this Kansas City Chiefs offense. You mentioned the speed element, but I think underneath, honestly, because like you said, the guy is a forced missed tackle machine. He gives kind of a Kamara shiftiness vibe when you watch him in the open field. That's what his bread and butter at Florida. He obviously had Kyle Pitts, taking a lot of attention away, but he's a good player. It's just a matter of getting him out there.
Definitely. And as far as the Chiefs are concerned now, they go they're very deep, 5 deep into that wide receiver core right now, where obviously they've still got Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, McCole Hardman, now Kadarius Toney, and Sky Moore as well. One other source that I reached out to said, I don't think this really bodes that well for Sky Moore, certainly this season, but then also you're almost kind of looking into the future for him as well. Maybe next year, if some of those guys leave in free agency, then maybe he becomes a number 3 receiver, whatever it would be. But I can't imagine Sky Moore at this point, as long as everyone stays healthy, getting a ton of opportunities in that offense. But I mean, I've talked about it ad nauseum last year, the year before, everything like that. I was clamoring for the Chiefs to get more depth at those wide receiver, tight end type positions. And I do think that there could be something to, they get rid of Tyreek Hill. Obviously, they had the best 1-2 punch in the NFL for years with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, but they get rid of Tyreek Hill and you replace him with Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore. There's a possibility that sort of depth and the ability for Patrick Mahomes to get the ball around the offense a little bit more could actually strengthen things to a bit.
It's crazy that we're talking about this move, and Juju Smith-Schuster and Marquez Valdez-Scantling had over 100 receiving yards against the 49ers, and Mecole Hardman scored, 3 touchdowns in that game?
Yes.
So all of those guys produce. Sky Moore, like you said, he's coming along a little bit. They're using him a little bit more. Maybe they don't think he's good enough to be a high-impact guy in this season, and they view this season as, look, we're not good enough right now to beat the Buffalo Bills, but we're probably good enough to beat anybody else. And so why not, make a little bit of a gamble here and make this move? But yeah, I think you see it every week that Mahomes, there was, of course, going to be the loss of, Tyreek Hill is the most dynamic player, maybe the entire NFL. He goes to Miami and is leading the league in receiving yards. But in big leverage moments against good defenses like a San Francisco, I think him not keying in on one receiver, we're starting to see the benefits of that long term.
The final element here is you have to sort of think that this, barring an injury, would probably take Kansas City out of the running for Odell Beckham Jr.
It's a fair point. They're different players, but,
right.
Maybe it probably depends on what kind of deal he wants. They could still say, hey, if you want to do the 1 year kind of, hero type deal, why not come on down? So I don't know if I would say it rules it out, but, it probably makes it less likely, it's fair to say. Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't know how many wide receivers at that point you would actually need, but yeah, certainly anything is still probably on the table there. Big injury news yesterday, Ja'Marr Chase out 4 to 6 weeks with a hip injury. I saw a report later yesterday that said that timeline's kind of unknown because they believe that Ja'Marr Chase could recover from that injury faster just because of his physical makeup. But overall, this seems like something that certainly could linger, through 4 weeks or so.
It's a huge loss. It's a hip that he was dealing before the game against Atlanta. So I don't want to, have some conspiracy theory, but I think it's kind of strange. He had 115 yards and 2 touchdowns before the half. With about 20 seconds left in the half, he went to the locker room before everybody else did. And then when they were up 18 points with 4 minutes left in the game, he had 2 catches on that drive. And I'm just, look, I'm sure he was pushing himself to play. I know players can often, they're the reason they're playing. It's not teams being cynical and forcing. It's more the player themselves, but just absolutely zero reason for him to be on the field at that moment. So hopefully he recovers quickly. No surgery, which is obviously a good sign. Paul Dehner Jr. with the Athletic said it's a non-displaced injury. I know, we're not doctors, but that's, I guess, better than a displacement of the hip situation. But yes, he is obviously a massive, massive part of this offense. T. Higgins isn't really 100% healthy either. Him and Tyler Boyd are obviously 2 great players for your number 2 and number 3, but that offense was starting to hum, with Ja'Marr Chase. And now, obviously going to be out for at least a month.
One of my dynasty teams absolutely stinks, so I traded away Tyler Boyd at his highest possible value. So if you also have a terrible dynasty team with Tyler Boyd on your roster, I would suggest possibly flipping him for a second-round pick or something like that as well. All right, let's talk about some trade deadline rumblings. I had a report yesterday. The Patriots at least are receiving calls for running back Damian Harris and safety Jabril Peppers. That's added on to the fact that they're receiving calls for their top 4 wide receivers, the top 4 veteran wide receivers. That would be Jacoby Myers, Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, and Nelson Aguilar. I would say on all of these that the Patriots are not shopping these players. They are simply receiving calls at this point. But it is interesting that teams are obviously looking at the Patriots, seeing their record right now at 3-4, and going after some of these players either with player friend or with team friendly contracts like Kendrick Bourne and Devontae Parker, or who are on contract years like running back Damian Harris, wide receiver Jacoby Myers. But yeah, I think that I don't know if anything actually gets done with any of those players. If Damian Harris gets traded, the Patriots would have some pretty significant depth issues behind Ramondre Stevenson. But I could certainly see with Tyquan Thornton's emergence at wide receiver, at least one of those wide receivers possibly getting moved if the Patriots could get the right offer. But what kind of value do you think those wide receivers would actually have in a trade?
So it obviously, part of it comes down to contract, both the value of the deal and then also how many years remain on the contract. So with Aguilar, 1 year remain, or this is the final year of his contract and has a $5 million salary. So I think they would maybe have a team ask New England to convert, like we saw so far with Robert Quinn and Deion Jones, convert some salary and retain it, and maybe buy a 6th round pick, maybe best case scenario, a 5th round pick, but I'm not so sure there. With Kendrick Bourne, he has a 2-year deal or a 1.5-year deal, and it's a good value. I mean, they signed him for 3 years, $15 million, and he outplayed that valuation, 8 weeks into the season last year. So I think that one, you maybe try to get a 4th or, a 5th and something else for him, just because the best free agent in free agency, might be Jacoby Myers, the best wide receiver in free agency. Right. It's a very, very short and not frankly talented list of players. So if you're giving up a guy that can contribute in 2023 at that position, I think you leverage that a lot and boost the value by, from that alone.
Yeah, and Devontae Parker is another guy with a year and a half left on his deal. And like you mentioned, Jacoby Myers, I don't think the Patriots would be in a rush to trade Jacoby Myers as long as they win this weekend and don't bottom out, anything like that. Nothing crazy happens this weekend. But if you're a team that want to get a head start on Jacoby Myers, I think that I wrote a piece yesterday in my mailbag. I referenced you for all these trade values. I think that you put a 3rd round trade value on Jacoby Myers, which does seem fair because that's probably, if the Patriots do wind up getting comp picks in next year's free agency, which my buddy Mark Daniels of Mass Live made a good point that Patriots do have a lot of cap space heading into next year. So there's no guarantee that they will actually get comp picks for free agents who will leave next season. But getting the comp pick formula into consideration, they could wind up getting a 3rd or 4th round compensatory pick for Jacoby Myers. So I think that's probably where you would set his value in a trade. Someone just asked a question with Kareem Hunt trade rumors. Is Dearness Johnson a stash in fantasy? I think we talked a little bit about Kareem Hunt already on Wednesday's show, maybe on Monday's show. But I think that Jerome Ford is certainly a stash. Dearness Johnson was very good last season, but the Browns haven't showed a lot of interest in using him this year. But what do you make of the latest Kareem Hunt possible trade rumors?
I think they're real. I think that Cleveland is probably exploring that. He obviously asked for a trade before the season even began in an expiring contract. They're not going to, at least to my estimation, they're not going to pay him again. They've already extended Nick Chubb. Like you mentioned, they used a 5th round pick on Jerome Ford. Dearness Johnson will I guess, be will be gone as well. But I think the tricky part is they play on Monday against Cincinnati, and the deadline is, of course, Tuesday. So that kind of shortens the window and shortens the timeline. And it's tough because they may think, hey, if we beat Cincinnati and get to 3-5, with Cincinnati would then be, I want to say, 4-4. Baltimore obviously is now 5-3 with the win last night over Tampa Bay, but nevertheless, they could convince themselves they're still in this AFC North picture. Deshaun Watson, of course, returns relatively soon in week 12 or week 13. So that really, I think, makes it very difficult. But I do think a team like Philadelphia, a team like Buffalo would be interested in taking on Hunt. He has a minor base salary this year, a pending free agent, wouldn't be a massive price, and would be the immediate best running back, I think, on both of those rosters, even in a kind of a down year for him. But I think he's the best guy for both of those teams if they were to make the move. And obviously they are true contenders, that want to do something to add a little bit of boost to that offense. So he's a name I'm watching, no question.
One other question before we get into some other topics here. Someone in here is very interested in Jerry Jeudy to the New York Giants. That is William. Doug and Brad announced Jeudy to the Giants. Now, I, I, I mean, I know the Giants are in kind of a tough cap situation, but they have been very good this season. And this Kadarius Toney trade does free up some cap space for them. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they could enter the wide receiver trade market at this point. What do you think, Brad?
I don't think they would. It's crazy for him to be in the market. I just don't see Jerry Jeudy. I know he's been a name that's been
Right.
floated a bunch. He's had kind of some ups and downs in Denver, but you really try not to give up on top half of the first round
Right.
picks. 2 years into their career. I think KJ Hamler. I know that he's not asking us to announce KJ Hamler to the Giants. If you're looking at a Broncos receiver, I
Right.
think he's far more likely. Yeah, I mean, like you said, you move on from Kadarius Toney, so you have options. Wan'Dale Robinson, I do think, is starting to come along and play some pretty good football there for them. I think Joe Shane and Brian Daboll, they're not going to overreact to a great start to the season and all of a sudden become buyers. Again, they didn't tank this year, but they tried to hit the reset button in New York. So pivoting back and trading a second round pick for Jerry Jeudy doesn't really, mesh with that plan at all. So unfortunately, we're going to be the buzzkill that I tend to be on these things. But hey, maybe the Giants, poke around on some depth or something like that at wide receiver.
I always say that no trade is always much more likely than a trade occurring during the trade deadline, since they are still so rare in the NFL. But we'll see what happens there. Two big takeaways from the Thursday night game. Ravens beat the Buccaneers. First of which is the injuries that the Ravens had. Fortunately for them, it seems like the injuries to tight end Mark Andrews, wide receiver Rashad Bateman, and running back Gus Edwards all are not overly serious. But I think that there are some questions about whether those guys should have been on the field to begin with, because all of them were questionable. All of them seemed like they were, right around game time decisions. They all play, they all get banged up. None of them actually finish the game. Now, they do have a long wait now to get healthy before their next game. But Ravens were able to win, so maybe it was the right decision to put those guys on the field, even though they weren't contributing that much out there. And the other takeaway is that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are now 3-5. Tom Brady, I was digging into our stats today, and overall, I don't think he's taken a significant step back this season. A lot of his passing grades, his big time throw rate, his turnover worthy play rate, his ability to throw under pressure, all of these things aren't that far off from his career norm. The one thing that really stood out to me was that his passing grade while blitzed was significantly down this season. And I was even looking at pressure rates for the Buccaneers when blitzed, and those are actually down from last year. And Tom Brady's actually getting rid of the ball a tick slower this year. So that pressure rate isn't down because he's holding on, because he's, getting rid of the ball so fast. It seems like it's fixable though, because I was looking at some of his worst plays while being blitzed this season, and it doesn't seem like he's panicking back there. I think it's more so he's just making his worst decisions, maybe by chance, on those plays when he is blitzed, basically throwing it into the hands of defenders. They're not catching them because he only has one interception on the season, but 4 of his turnover-worthy plays this season out of 7 have come when he was blitzed. And maybe I'm not looking at things right. Maybe I am. But like I said, it doesn't seem like he's overly panicking because the pressure is coming. It just seems like that's when his bad decisions are being made. But I think that these are fixable for Tom Brady. But I also think that he probably doesn't trust the offensive line that well in front of him. I think that that's one of the issues that he's having this season. It would certainly help to get Ryan Jensen back. We'll see if that happens. But the other thing is that I don't think he's got that safety valve that he had in the past with New England and in Tampa Bay with either a Rob Gronkowski or a Julian Edelman or a Wes Welker. It obviously is great to have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but those aren't those guys that he can trust to get open, on a quick passing game or in the middle of the field or in short distances, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe why they brought in Cole Beasley for, a fortnight, is kind of that, talent and ability to get open really quickly. It is interesting. I still think he is Tom Brady. His arm strength is still all the way there. He's got good zip on the ball. He did have 2 turnover-worthy plays last night, though. I actually thought he could have had 3. I went back and watched the film this morning. I think it was fair to kind of say it could go either way. But a bottom 5 grade for us passing-wise last night over the last, 6.5 seasons, since 2016, bottom 5. And I think he kind of did play that way. At the same time, like you said, he's yelling at his center. He's yelling at Mike Evans for running the wrong route, which Mike Evans actually did in the postgame say it was his fault on the one into the end zone that almost was intercepted. He said, I was supposed to cut in harder and whatever the case may be. So I think it's just a lack of kind of chemistry and understanding. Yeah. He obviously did miss a lot of the offseason program, so I'm sure that'll be brought up as a potential reason why, even though he's been playing with Mike Evans for a while now. But yeah, it's just a comedy of errors, and I think we talk about this a lot too. Some quarterbacks are more susceptible to interior pressure, like a Tom Brady, and that's, of course, where the center and the left guard, they've had issues. Whereas like a guy like Patrick Mahomes who drops, 10, 11 yards back, his tackles need to be really good players and be able to, push edge rushers behind him, and he's so good at navigating interior pressure. So it's different styles for different guys, and Brady is not good with interior pressure, and that's been the issue. And then, of course, the receivers and all that, obviously, the different lineup every single week, it seems, at wide receiver.
Yeah, I was talking to a scout about Tom Brady earlier in the week, and he actually said, I'll quote him verbatim, "I know that he becomes human when he can't step up in the pocket via interior pressure. So if the Buccaneers have a leaky interior offensive line, that's not a good sign for Tom." And I think that some of that, like we mentioned, is somewhat a lack of trust. I think that would help if he had guys who had been in there before, like Ali Marpet, like Ryan Jensen, and that has not been the case up to this point. All right, let's take a quick break for our sponsor. PFF Wire is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. Will you focus on your roster moves? Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow? Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. Let's kick off our next segment here. Fantasy news and notes. First game up, Broncos, Jaguars. The Jaguars are favored by 2.5 points. The point total last time I looked was 39.5. Just a reminder, this game kicks off on Sunday morning, 9:30 a.m. on ESPN Plus. So you might have to subscribe to ESPN Plus to get this game. But big injury news on this one. Quarterback Russell Wilson for the Broncos off the injury report with those shoulder and hamstring injuries. He is good to go on Sunday morning. And as far as fantasy injuries go, not a lot for both teams. But Jaguars wide receiver Jamal Agnew was still limited with a knee injury as of yesterday.
Yeah, Russ, the high knees on the flight over clearly were effective. So hey, you can argue with the process, but you can't argue with the results, I suppose. Yeah, this is an interesting game. I think we'll get to it later, but I have a best bet in this game because I love to start out with some money with a cup of coffee on Sundays, as I like to say. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. I mean, the Jaguars open -4. It has now crossed the key number, and they're -2.5. So some money came in on Denver. I think part of that with optimism that Russell Wilson would play, and it was kind of more of a question mark before the week began. I mean, this is a huge game for both teams. Their seasons are not really trending in a great direction either, but their seasons might be completely over if either team loses this game. So it's going to be a fun one, a pseudo home game for the Jaguars, of course, in London, and I think it's a great way to start our Sunday morning.
All right, next Sunday game, Falcons favored by 4 points at home against the Carolina Panthers. Point total is 41.5. Carolina Panthers running back Chuba Hubbard out with an ankle injury as of Thursday. Laviska Shenault was limited with a hamstring injury. For the Falcons, cornerback A.J. Terrell out with a hamstring injury, and running back Caleb Huntley was not practicing because of an illness. But we've got P.J. Walker with no A.J. Terrell. We'll see if he can go off like he did last week against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But the big takeaway here is that Deontay Foreman should probably be a full go in your fantasy lineups because he was so effective. I actually think Deontay Foreman is a very good running back. I think there's some extenuating factors for why he hasn't had the career that some people expected him to. But when he's on the field, he's usually pretty effective.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. He obviously kind of washed out in his original spot. What was that, Houston, I want to say?
Houston, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned A.J. Terrell. So that means, again, no A.J. Terrell and no Casey Hayward Jr. on the outside. And we saw what that meant last week. It meant the Cincinnati Bengals were throwing the ball all over the yard. P.J. Walker is not Joe Burrow, but he
was last week.
Yeah. He had 6 big time throws. As you said, he tied Josh Allen for the most in a single game this season. Had our highest single game grade of the year so far. Again, he's not that's not going to happen every week. Yeah. But I also think DJ Moore obviously had a super slow start to the year. Now has literally zero competition for targets and is going to be going up against backup corners no matter where he lines up. Yeah. I think he's going to get fed a ton in this game as well. And my favorite stat or nugget or whatever of the entire NFL season to date, if Carolina wins this football game, they are leading the NFC South. It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, and the Falcons would too if they win as well. I mean, the NFC South is trash this season. I don't think there's a better word to use to describe it, but I do think that the struggles that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have had, we mentioned them, they still have a very good opportunity to rebound, make the playoffs, and then anything can happen with Tom Brady as your quarterback. Next game up, Cowboys favored by 9.5 against the Chicago Bears. Point total is 42.5 as of Thursday. Wide receiver Noah Brown was not practicing because of a foot injury. Running back Ezekiel Elliott not practicing because of a knee injury. And Cowboys tight end Dalton Schultz was limited with a knee injury. I know that Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys head coach, said that there was a possibility that Ezekiel Elliott could still play against the Bears, but I also think that some of the Cowboys beat writers were saying that this could actually wind up being kind of a multi-week thing for Ezekiel Elliott. So I'd say that coaches tend to be a little bit more optimistic. We'll see how it goes for Ezekiel Elliott. I'm not sure which way this actually winds up going, but if he doesn't play, then obviously Tony Pollard would be a must start in fantasy.
Yeah, we throw this around a lot, but I think Ezekiel Elliott might actually be one of the toughest guys in the entire NFL. He's proven that over the course of his career. So I get where McCarthy's coming from, but I tend to believe, Clarence Hill, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, is the one who said it's not even just the knee. He also has a thigh bruise, I want to say it is, like a deep thigh bruise on top of the knee injury. And if you watch the Detroit game, he got hit squarely in the knee. He was down for a while. I was shocked he even came back in the football game. He did score a touchdown for my fantasy team, so thank you, Zeke, for being so tough. But I would be kind of surprised if he plays. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to rest him because it's also they have a bye after this game, and then they're at Green Bay, at Minnesota. That's, basically massive NFC playoff implications right out of the gate. So let Tony Pollard play. The Bears are 24th right now in EPA per rush allowed. Pollard is good enough to take advantage of that. I would let Zeke get healthy and rest up. But yeah, you cannot rule him out because that's kind of the player he is.
Not a lot of respect for the Chicago Bears after that win over the New England Patriots on Monday night, 9.5 points. But see how that winds up going. Next up, we've got the Dolphins favored in Detroit against the Lions by 3.5 points. Point total is 51.5 for the Dolphins. Running back Raheem Mostert limited with a knee injury. Tight end Durham Smythe limited with a hamstring, and wide receiver Jalen Waddle limited with a shoulder. For the Detroit Lions, TJ Hawkinson limited with a knee injury. Wide receiver Josh Reynolds limited with a knee injury. Amon-Ra St. Brown was still limited with that concussion/non-concussion. And running back DeAndre Swift, full go in practice on his shoulder and ankle injuries. So definitely a good sign that the Lions could wind up getting DeAndre Swift back in this game. I'm a little bit surprised maybe that the Dolphins are only favored by 3.5 points. I know the Lions showed some life early in the season when DeAndre Swift and Amon-Ra St. Brown were healthy, but the Lions have been pretty terrible over the last 2 or 3 weeks now.
It didn't help that Amon-Ra St. Brown was ruled out, I want to say in the first quarter of the Dallas game. Then it actually came out that, he did show, I guess, the doctors the new protocols. He looked like he had lost balance, so they had to pull him out of the game, which of course is a good thing. But pretty much was ruled that he did not have a concussion almost right away, and it did not matter. So I think he, in some ways it might benefit him because he obviously was dealing with injuries elsewhere before that Dallas game. Even coming out of the bye, he was not fully healthy. Maybe missing 3/4 of a game against the Dallas Cowboys defense can even go further in helping you recover. I hear you on the spread. I think it's one of those where, look, Detroit, it's their season again. Like, not that you should bet this way, but, I think Miami is not a great team. They're a good team. I will say, though, their defensive line, which we talked about, we had high expectations for, kind of didn't meet them the first month of the year. I thought against Pittsburgh, who granted does not have a good offensive line, but you're starting to see why Jalen Phillips was the number 1 overall recruit out of high school. Fell to 15 in the draft because he almost retired. He did retire from college football, for a year and then came back. But he is a physical freak. I mean, the guy is massive, and he had a pursuit tackle in that game against Pittsburgh where he probably ran, I don't know, 30 yards across the field to make a tackle, and it was like, this guy is the best athlete on the field right now. That's what it looked like. So they're starting to come on. He in particular is starting to flash a lot of high-level play. And I think that, again, Jared Goff is not a good quarterback against pressure. Miami, if they start to play more like that than they did early in the season, then I see why the Dolphins are favored in this game.
Yeah, for sure. Jalen Phillips, he wound up going 18th overall last season. I think that if Mac Jones had not been there for the Patriots might have wound up taking Jalen Phillips. They were big on him. All right, next game here. Vikings favored by 3.5 points over the Arizona Cardinals. Point total is 49. James Conner on Thursday was limited with a rib injury, but he was not spotted during the open portion of practice today. Cardinals running back Darrell Williams also limited with a knee injury. Benjamin has been playing so well for the Cardinals that I think there's a question of, even when James Conner is fully back and healthy, whether or not we start to see a little bit more of a timeshare there for the Cardinals at running back.
I think a committee makes sense for sure. Obviously, they split guys out wide and they have a lot of empty backfields and do a lot of different things. And so not having a tell and rotating players and using them differently, I think could be interesting. Maybe even some, kind of 21 personnel, 2-back sets and on all sorts of different things. I hear you. I don't think any of them is significantly better than the other. Connor may be a better pass catcher than the rest. But the thing I'm watching for here, first of all, Minnesota opened -5.5. Now only 3.5. Didn't cross, a field goal or anything like that. But notable movement because Minnesota's coming out of a bye. Arizona did play on Thursday, so a mini bye for them. But a very notable thing, I know I'm not breaking any news for redraft or dynasty, but DeAndre Hopkins, if you're looking at DFS lineups, I'm sure he's going to be expensive, but I think he might be worth it in this matchup. They lined him up in the slot on 27 snaps against New Orleans, 17 more than he'd played in the snap in a single game so far for Arizona. And Minnesota has our dead last grade in the slot. Shannon Sullivan, the starter, is, I want to say, 109th out of 112 slot corners. But even when they're putting safeties in there, whoever they're putting in the slot, they are dead last for us in coverage grade out of the slot. And I think that's a matchup they're going to try to exploit. Going to throw DeAndre Hopkins the ball a lot. And I think they could be down in this game because, Minnesota can score. But anyway, I like that play a lot. I also like Arizona. They blitz at a very high rate. Kirk Cousins does not do well against the blitz. Interior pressure, again, Kirk Cousins is not a guy that can handle interior pressure. They have J.J. Watt. They have Zach Allen. This is an interesting matchup, and I think Arizona is an interesting team. I know Judah, some of our interns, Judah and Tage, both like Arizona money line in this game. So maybe, a matchup to exploit if you see things the same way.
Are the Vikings the least talked about and least respected 5-1 team of all time?
It's incredible. Maybe only the New York Giants being less respected maybe helps them. But yeah, it's
at
funny.
least people talked about them. Yeah, at least people talked about how the Giants were 5-1. Like, I feel like no one's even talking about how the Vikings are 5-1. Like, and I understand it. If you look at the teams that the Vikings have beat, like, I totally understand why people aren't talking about it. But like, with a win on Sunday, they'd be 6-1, and yeah, no one is talking about them whatsoever. All right, and next up here, we've got the Raiders and Saints. The Raiders are favored by 1 point over the Saints in New Orleans. Point total is 49.5. Quite a few injuries to get through here. Raiders wide receiver Devontae Adams expected to play through a bad flu. He was not practicing as of Thursday, but then also wide receiver Mac Hollins, running back Josh Jacobs, and tight end Darren Waller were all limited on Thursday. As far as the Saints go, I mean, they are not getting over these injuries at all right now. Wide receiver Jarvis Landry, cornerback Marshawn Lattimore, wide receiver Michael Thomas, and tight end Adam Trautman all were not practicing on Thursday. Tight end Juwan Johnson and wide receiver Keith Kirkwood were limited. I know that I had some pretty high hopes for Michael Thomas this year. I thought, all right, he's finally back healthy. He, was off for what was it, like a year and a half, whatever that was, with injuries. All right, get him back in this offense. And now he's been dealing with this foot injury for like 4 or 5 weeks now at this point. They just cannot get him back on the field. Same thing goes with Jarvis Landry. So we'll see if they can practice today, if whatever winds up happening there. But seems like it's going to be another Andy Dalton and Chris Olave show for the Saints this weekend.
Yeah, Yeah, the newly anointed starter and Andy Dalton. A lot of storylines here. Dennis Allen, of course, used to coach Derek Carr in the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yep.
Back then, the Oakland Raiders. So, a bit of a revenge game, I suppose, for him. But yeah, I mean, these guys, unfortunately, when you sustain one of these original injuries, the tough part is you're then kind of favoring parts of your body, and it breaks down other parts. And Michael Thomas, look, he scored touchdowns in both of the first 2 games of the season when he could play, and basically has not played since. It's very unfortunate. But you did mention Devontae Adams apparently has a bad flu. Apparently the whole team at some time, or a lot of the team, has had a flu or whatever this bug is. It's going around the entire locker room. Most are expected to play and be okay, but that can really sap the energy out of a team and make things tough when they couldn't practice in full or aren't, the fluids and all those things. So coming out of a bye, still not fully healthy. For the Houston game, now travel down to New Orleans, a huge game again against another matchup of 2-5 football teams. We have a lot of those this weekend, I guess. But yeah, it's a war of attrition in this matchup. Really, both teams are struggling. Darren Waller with the hamstring. We've seen this with so many guys this year, and they do play. And then a couple snaps into the game, they're out. So he's one I would be afraid, of playing him in DFS for sure, but even fantasy, I would, right up until game time, I'd make sure I have somebody else on my bench and keep an eye out on that one until Sunday.
Next up, we've got the Patriots and Jets. I believe, did this line move to 3.5 for the Patriots?
Ooh, I hadn't seen that, but that would be a big deal if it has.
Okay. I thought that I'd seen that in your notes, but yeah, Patriots favored by 3 in New York. Point total is 40.5 points for the Patriots. Wide receivers Nelson Aguilar and wide receiver Kendrick Bourne, both limited. Aguilar played last week. Bourne did not. So certainly something to watch there. And then for the Jets, wide receiver Corey Davis is out. I think that we might kind of disagree on this game a little bit. I actually would consider taking the Jets in this one, just because Patriots were so bad last week against the Bears. They beat the Lions and Browns, which I don't think really convinced me that much that they're a good team. I know the Jets have a lot of injuries right now. Clearly just lost Breece Hall, Elijah Vera Tucker. We'll see how that line holds up without their, probably best and most consistent offensive linemen. Zach Wilson has certainly struggled at times, and there's a possibility that, Bill Belichick could have him out there seeing ghosts like he did against Sam Darnold a few years ago come Halloween time. But I don't know. I kind of want this Patriots team to prove it to me before I'm willing to, lay money on them on the road as a favored road team. I don't know. What are you thinking on this one?
Oh, I totally hear you. And I also think it's notable. Again, I want to say I share these narratives and storylines that you shouldn't be betting on stuff like this alone. But Jets defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich was asked about last season when the Patriots beat the Jets 54-13 and how they were still throwing the ball downfield, up 35, up 40 points late in this game. And you can tell he has been thinking about it pretty much since that day. I think this is a locker room that is really pissed off, really galvanized. On this win streak, it's been a lot of games on the road. They obviously were at Denver. So I think it's kind of a homecoming for them back to MetLife Stadium. CJ Mosley called it Jet Life Stadium, which I thought was cool, so I'd throw that in there. But no, I think it's a heavy motivation game. I think this is going to be, a true battle on the defenses where both offenses are going to have a difficult time moving the ball down the field, really at all, because the defenses are far ahead of the offense. But Zach Wilson loves Corey Davis. He seems to target him a ton. He's always looking for him. I think it's a big loss for them, and obviously Elijah Vera Tucker and Breece Hall as well. So I guess I hear you. I would just say points are certainly not, what I expect. Granted, I didn't think they were going to come in New England, Chicago either, but this is going to be a low-scoring game, I think.
Yeah, I would expect that as well. Mac Jones, Bill Belichick, sort of finally got around to announcing that Mac Jones is going to be the starter against the Jets. It was kind of a weird little battle between him and the beat reporters to finally get him to actually explicitly say, yes, Mac Jones is going to be the starting quarterback. But did you see the renderings of the new Bills stadium yesterday?
I did, yes.
A lot of the comments I saw there were Jets fans being like, okay, when are we going to get a new stadium? When can we leave MetLife? All those things. MetLife has been open for 10 years. And I know that CJ Mosley wants to dub it Jet Life Stadium, all that stuff. MetLife Stadium is trash. It was the first stadium that I covered as in a road game. I was like, oh, cool. It's this brand new stadium, whatever. It looks like an air conditioner from the outside. The entire inside of the stadium is just different shades of gray. Every other stadium that has been built since MetLife Stadium is 100 times cooler than MetLife Stadium. And like, it was wild to me in the Twitter replies being like, we need a new stadium. We need a new stadium. Like, usually I'd say after 10 years, like, that's insane. You do not need a new stadium. I'm kind of with Jets fans on this one. They could use a new stadium.
Tough to find real estate in northern New Jersey, as they say. So I was there for the Giants preseason game. It didn't impress me, I guess, but I need to pay more attention. Hopefully, going to Bears Jets, and I'll keep an eye out how stinky it is as a stadium. But
I will,
yeah.
I will say, I think I've said this before. Like, every time I ever covered a game there was no buzz around the Jets or Giants. Like, maybe it's a better atmosphere there now that the Jets and Giants are good. That certainly helps things a little bit. Next up, we've got no fantasy relevant news injury wise, with the Eagles favored by 10.5 points at home against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The point total there is 43.5. I think the most interesting thing there for me is probably the point total. I know the Steelers have had trouble moving the ball on offense, but I'd be tempted to take the over in that game.
Yeah, we've noticed as well the Eagles kind of let up in the second half, and I think they will have a massive first half lead again in this game potentially. So the same could happen. They're letting up because obviously they're up by a bunch. But yeah, I don't hate that at all. Kenny Pickett wants to push the ball down the field, and as good as this, Eagles defense obviously add Robert Quinn in a trade this week. I don't know how much he'll actually play. Right. And their secondary is very talented and can probably pick Kenny Pickett off a couple times in this game. I like that. I hear you on that one. It's a battle of Pennsylvania. I think they're going to try to score until the bitter end, not really give up on the game, even though it's AFC versus NFC and all that. I think there's enough bad blood that they try to score until the clock hits 0.
Next one, Titans favored by 2.5 points on the road against the Texans. Point total there is 40.5. Titans quarterback Ryan Tannehill is questionable to play on that injured ankle. And for the Texans, wide receiver Nico Collins was not practicing as of Thursday because of his groin injury.
Biggest one for me here is Titans head coach Mike Vrabel after their game last week, their win. When asked about Ryan Tannehill, who hurt his knee, left the game, came back in after 1 or 2 Malik Willis snaps, he said, I hope he can play. It was not like he'll be fine, don't worry about it. It was, I hope he can play. And also, Tannehill relies on his mobility a ton. They obviously run as much play action as anybody else. He does scramble here and there, the occasional designed run. His lack of mobility matters to him a lot more than maybe other players. And this spread opened as Houston +4. It crossed the key number of a field goal. They're now only +2.5. So I would monitor that as well. It's a bit of a scary, I think, spot, maybe a stay away spot, but you might see, Houston is only, the Titans are only laying less than a field goal at Houston. There is good reason for that. I would be cautious of seeing that. And, it's a trap, I think, based on how I look at it.
Yeah, and if Malik Willis did wind up starting for the Titans, that would be his first career start as a rookie. And I'm not sure if he's looked totally ready when he has been out there at times in that offense. We even saw him. It was a strange play for the Titans where it was a jet sweep to Malik Willis from Ryan Tannehill. I don't know if that was before or after the injury, but wound up getting fumbled. It was a strange play that they had there. All right, next game, Colts favored at home by 3 points over the Washington Commanders. Point total is 39.5. Lots of injuries in this one. Washington Commanders wide receiver Jahan Dotson out with a hamstring injury. Wide receiver Diami Brown and tight end Logan Thomas both questionable. And of course, Colts quarterback Matt Ryan will be inactive. And it is Sam Ehlinger starting for the Indianapolis Colts. Are you surprised that Sam Ehlinger is favored by 3 points over the Washington Commanders here?
Interesting too, because Kwity Paye's not going to play in this game. Shaquille Leonard's going to be on a snap count, but will play. Like they're not particularly healthy themselves. I'm not though. I mean, Taylor Heineke is Taylor Heineke. Obviously it's not a marquee quarterback matchup by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the biggest issue with Indianapolis right now, and it's crazy to say this every week, but it's their offensive line and their protection, particularly at left tackle. And Ehlinger, he mitigates that as much as he possibly can. I mean, he's a very mobile quarterback. He ran the ball a ton at Texas, and I think they're going to probably run a lot of read option and do a bunch of things with him and now a healthier Jonathan Taylor. So, I get it from that standpoint. And obviously Washington is just not – they did just beat Tampa Bay, but as every week goes on, how impressed are Green Bay, excuse me. We keep holding up these wins over Tampa Bay and Green Bay as these great wins.
Right.
And as every week goes on, they're less and less impressive, not to take away from them. So, yeah, I hear you. It's a fair question. I just think maybe the way Vegas used this is people are viewing it as a downgrade from Matt Ryan, perhaps more than they should, just given what he can kind of bring that's a different element to the offense.
Definitely. And I'd say that one element here that I'm kind of interested in is that we're tossing now another quarterback from that 2021 NFL draft class into those list of passers that have, started games and played considerably since last season. And it wouldn't take a ton for Sam Ehlinger this season, at least, to be the highest graded passer from that draft class. I think that's currently Davis Mills with right around a 70 grade. But even going back to last year, Mac Jones is the highest graded career passer in that draft class with only a 74.8 passing grade. Next up is Davis Mills, 63.9. Trey Lance and Trevor Lawrence, both 57.8. So I don't know. We'll see how he stacks up against the rest of his class when he gets out there against the Commanders. Next up here, we've got the 49ers favored by 1.5 points on the road against the Los Angeles Rams. This should be a fun one, despite the Rams' struggles this season. For the 49ers, wide receiver Juwan Jennings was not practicing with a hamstring injury. Wide receiver Deebo Samuel was not practicing with a hamstring injury. And fullback Kyle Juszczyk not practicing with a hamstring injury. For the Rams, Darrell Henderson was not practicing with an illness, and wide receiver Van Jefferson was still limited with that knee injury. It would be big for the Rams to be able to get Van Jefferson back in this game against the 49ers. But yeah, that point total only at 43. 49ers favored by 1.5. This is an interesting matchup, interesting line for me.
Yeah, I did love San Francisco. I picked them on Sunday. The Deebo Samuel development is obviously concerning. He went crazy in that game against LA earlier in the season. Yeah. Had the remarkable, run after the catch where he kind of shook Jalen Ramsey out of his shoes and shook a couple people out of their shoes on the way to a touchdown score. And certainly let them hear it the rest of the afternoon and even in the week since. But yeah, I mean, this is just a matchup where outside of last year's NFC Championship game, which frankly they still should have won, the Niners have just owned the Rams. It's a great matchup. Their defensive line can dominate this Rams offensive line with all their injuries, even coming off a bye. I still like San Francisco in this spot, but it's, certainly a little bit scary. But hey, you trade all those picks to bring in Christian McCaffrey. You do all these things. This is a massive, could determine or go a long way in determining the division type of game. I think San Francisco comes in and gets another win against, Sean McVay.
Next up, the Seahawks are favored by 3 points on the road at home against the Giants. Point total of 44.5. For the Giants, Kenny Golladay not practicing with that knee injury. For the Seahawks, DK Metcalf was not practicing yesterday with a knee injury as well. Vegas keeps disrespecting the 6-1 New York Giants. It's a somewhat of a revenge game for Geno Smith going up against his former team, the New York Giants. This is an interesting one to me. I would also, my initial thought on this line is that I'd consider taking the over at 44.5, just because Seahawks have done a good job putting points on the board. I know the Giants have been a little bit more stingy, but against that Seahawks defense, I think we could actually start to see the Giants move the ball a little bit better in this matchup as well.
I like that a lot. I do. I see it the same way. I think Jones has been using his legs, and Brian Daboll's been kind of untapping his ability as a runner, and then throwing off of that, and it's been pretty successful. At least their defense is good, maybe not great, but I think there's almost no chance DK Metcalf plays in this game with his knee. I know he's trying to push to play. I think it's around a 1% chance he actually plays in this game, and that's huge. Obviously, that changes everything. Tyler Lockett basically told reporters he's also nowhere near 100%. He's going to play. But he's like, I'm not healthy, just so you guys know. So, all that said, I still do agree with you. Geno, pretty funny. When Geno replaced Eli Manning and there was the whole hubbub, and that basically was why Ben McAdoo got fired, was for, ending the Eli Manning start streak. And hey, no one's got more vindication out of Geno Smith's season maybe than Ben McAdoo. He clearly was seeing something in those practices, the untapped potential of Geno Smith. So I agree with you. The points seems like they're going to be coming in this game.
I also, I know you're not supposed to do this, but I also kind of would lean a little bit more towards the Giants at +3 in this game as well. Just because I don't know, everyone keeps counting them out. All right, next game here, Bills favored by 11.5 points at home against Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. No significant fantasy injuries for the Bills, but for the Packers, wide receiver Allen Lazard not expected to play with that shoulder injury. Wide receiver Sammy Watkins and Christian Watson both limited, and quarterback Aaron Rodgers limited with that right thumb injury. Allen Lazard, I believe, said that he's not expected to play in this game, but that point total is high and that line is really high. So I don't know. I guess Vegas really expects the Bills to blow out the Packers in this one. And given the way the Packers have played this season, I can understand that, but I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to bet on the Bills being favored by 11.5 points over Aaron Rodgers in this one.
It's the most points, Aaron Rodgers has ever been an underdog by a decent margin. I want to say it's a full field goal. He was an 8.5 point underdog, I think, in his rookie season. And it's never been, even close to that number of 11.5 in any other time since. So I hear you. It is one of those where you kind of look at it and say, I might just bet the Packers out of principle. But without Allen Lazard and obviously all their other wide receiver injuries, Randall Cobb should not play in this game. I don't think Christian Watson is going to play in this game. The issue is when the Bills sit back in their zone and they have maybe the best non-blitzing pass rush in the NFL, how, if you're Green Bay, do you create chunk plays? I mean, it's all just going to be Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon who can get you, yippee, 6 yards a clip. Like, it's just going to be – it's so hard to envision how they actually – create some explosives. Romeo Doubs is the guy who can do that, but I think he was maybe one of the people Rodgers was alluding to when he said, let's stop playing guys that are making mistakes. I think Romeo Doubs was on the list of people in his head when he was saying that. He had a bad drop in their last game. Again, as much as I see the same way, I would like the points more than the spread if Buffalo just hangs 40. If it's like a 40-17 game, that wouldn't shock me, which is crazy to say.
Yeah, I don't know. I was actually looking at that under for the points just because I can't really. I don't know. The Packers, like you were mentioning, with the playmaking issues, I can't see them putting up a bunch of points. I don't know. Yeah, that might be a stay away for me.
One note. To cut you off. So this would help you, not me. So Bills right tackle Spencer Brown will not play in this game, and Rashawn Gary is in concussion protocol. But today the development was positive that he's actually closer to playing and should play. If he does play, then that's massive. He plays and the right tackle does not for Buffalo. That obviously would lead to fewer points.
Significant mismatch there. We'll get more into Monday night's matchup on our Monday show, but as of now, Bengals favored by 3 points on the road against the Browns, point total 45. Jamar Chase obviously not expected to play with that hip injury. Bengals tight end Hayden Hurst was also limited with groin and ankle injuries. And for the Browns, tight end David Njoku was not practicing with an ankle injury, and David Bell was limited with an ankle injury. That was their first practice of the week, though, so certainly possible that all those injuries could be updated as the week goes on. But any strong thoughts at this point on the Ohio battle there between the Bengals and Browns?
No Jamar Chase, like we talked about. I think David Njoku is a massive loss. Again, a guy that's trying to say he could play, but I just don't see it. That was originally reported as maybe like a 2 to 4 week injury for them. Denzel Ward's been in concussion protocol for a while now, for a couple of weeks. Just a lot of injuries here, but I think Cleveland can run the ball. No DJ Reader for Cincinnati. I think they try to keep it close, do it that way. It's a massive Monday night matchup for this AFC North.
Absolutely. All right. Best bets for the weekend. I already mentioned I like the over in that Steelers-Eagles matchup, but what are you feeling this weekend?
Yep. So one of them is Panthers money line. Only part of it is because I want the Panthers to be leading the NFC South just out of pure fun. But also, no starting cornerbacks for Atlanta in this game is a massive, massive deal. Even with DJ Moore kind of being the only wide receiver, and then the other side of the ball, Atlanta can't really generate much of a pass rush. So I think Carolina will run the football. And then on defense for Carolina, if Atlanta tries to run as much as they did last week against Cincinnati, they're not going to be successful. This is a good Carolina Panthers defensive line. Derek Brown has had his breakout season, playing really well right now. Shaq Thompson, a good linebacker. Obviously, they're just a good defense, frankly, altogether. So I think that there's some serious upset potential. It opened at +6, now down to +4. I understand that line movement, and I'm going all the way as, hey, +175. It's kind of a joke that they could be leading the NFC South, but I think they could be.
Unfortunately, I was looking into some player prop bets in that Jets Patriots game for Michael Carter rushing yards. I probably would have taken the over in that one, but doesn't look like we've got anything there because of the James Robinson trade and Breece Hall injury. But I do kind of like Ramondre Stevenson under 85.5 rushing and receiving yards. PFF Green Line likes that as well. It's a 2.1% edge on the under there for rushing and receiving yards. I know that Ramondre Stevenson was still a major part of that offense on Monday night against the Bears, but that was also because the Bears got off to a big lead. Didn't see a lot of Damian Harris in that game because Ramondre Stevenson was being used as the pass catching back. So, I mean, if something similar happens on Sunday against the Jets, yeah, you'd probably see a lot of Ramondre Stevenson, but another week that Damian Harris is healthy, I think that they would probably prefer to have that two-headed monster in New England at running back with Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris. But I think that will do it for today's edition of the PFF Wire podcast. We'll be back with you guys again on Monday. Make sure to subscribe to PFF Wire on Apple and Spotify. If you don't want to watch us here on YouTube, make sure to download the PFF app. Subscribe to PFF Plus, only $79.99 a year. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. We've got Mojal. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right in the comments here, saying almost an hour. This has to be a PFF Wire record. We are going a little bit longer on these Friday shows because we have to go game to game. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in and joining us. And we will be back again on Monday.